Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you, brother?
Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, brother. How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Um, Jazakallah khair for joining us in this Skype interview.
Yeah,
Just wanted to ask you a few questions about the issue of what's been going on in East Turkestan with the Uyghur Muslims, the idea of, the oppression of Muslims in China and associated issues. Before I do that, I'd just like to quickly mention to you, we inshallah publish this on the Facebook page, Government Intervention in the Muslim Community. And this is being held as part of a community campaign.
sure.
It's entitled Oppression of Muslims Made in China. And we've got a series of events associated to that campaign. We have street efforts to raise
Yeah,
awareness on the street. We've got a statement that mashallah has garnered a lot of support from the local community in Sydney, in Australia more widely.
yeah,
And we've got other efforts as well that we're trying to get khatibs to address the issue in the khutbahs. We've also got a protest, inshallah, on the 2nd of February. So this interview is part of that campaign, inshallah.
yeah.
So Jazakallah khair once again for your time. We really, really appreciate it. Um,
Welcome.
um, so we'll just start with, inshallah, your page. MashaAllah, your page is called Talk to East Turkestan.
Yes, yeah,
And it's got, mashallah, 60,000 or close to 60,000 followers.
yeah,
And I'm sure, apart from your efforts on the ground, that's a very big responsibility. It's a very good job that
yeah.
you're doing, raising awareness about the issue of Muslims in East Turkestan. Do you want to maybe just start by introducing yourself and the page? Just tell us a little bit about that page.
Sure. My name is Arslan Hidayat. I was born and raised in Sydney, Australia. My parents are from East Turkestan, and they left there right after the Cultural Revolution. Um, for your viewers, the Cultural Revolution was a time where China wholly was going through drought and famine, and around 45 million people had died. And East Turkestan also went through that oppression. And so my family decided to leave in the early 80s. I'm an English teacher. I'm currently working in Bahrain, so that's me. And part-time, I try to do as much as I can to raise awareness for the Uyghur Muslims of East Turkestan. Page-wise, it was actually started back in 2017 by our brother Abdurghani Sabit in Holland, and I've joined the team not too long after that, and we don't really do much, but just putting together the news, because especially 2-3 years ago, it was very difficult to get this daily news that we've got now of the Uyghur issue. Back then, you had to pick up bits from there, scraps from there, and put it all together and show a narrative. So that's our job, to show what's actually happening from the Uyghurs' perspective.
Cool.
Yeah,
You mentioned you're not really doing much. Very humble of you.
yeah,
SubhanAllah, the issue of what's going on, whatever little efforts we can do, it goes a
yeah,
long way, especially just on that note, because there's not many people that know about the
yeah,
details and know in depth about what's going on in East Turkestan. So, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala count our efforts for whatever little we do. But on the issue of East Turkestan, what is going on? Would you maybe be so kind to just brief us on that? What's going on in East Turkestan today? Why,
uh,
your page is dedicated to raising awareness about the atrocities.
yes.
What kind of atrocities, are taking place, and what's going on generally?
I guess we kind of have to go back not to today, because there is this misconception that this dhulm, this oppression, has only been happening for 2 or 3 years, when it hasn't. If you look more broadly, it's been going on for at least 200 to 250 years. If we look at more recently, we would kind of look at the last 70 years where the China's Communist Party comes into play, invades East Turkestan in 1949, and then totally annexes the region in 1955. Now, China today call the region the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, which literally means the word Xinjiang means newly taken over, new frontier, new land. But in their propaganda, they always say, no, Xinjiang or East Turkestan has always been a part of China. So from 1955 onwards, you see, and this happens in a lot of places where the elites of the society, the rich people, the business people, the professors are pretty much slaughtered, executed. And then from 1962 to about 1982, our language, the written language, kind of what Atatürk did in Turkey, he changed the Arabic script into Latin. So the same thing the Chinese also did. They changed our Arabic script into Latin, and then they rechanged it again back in 1982. So you have almost two generations, especially my mum's generation, where you've kind of gotten illiterate overnight. From 1981, China's one-child policy, and for the Uyghurs, the two-child policy comes along. So every third child is aborted, regardless of how long they are within the womb. And you know, as Muslims in general, and Uyghurs and Turks in general, we have a lot of children, 4, 5, 6, 7 children. So from 1981 till today, we can't even imagine the millions of deaths that have happened in these 30 years. Then you had certain uprisings where the Uyghurs protested peacefully against the Chinese regime in 1990, 1997, in 2009, and now we've recently seen over the last 3 years where thousands upon thousands have been slaughtered again. And now from 2014, really, 2014 is where it kind of starts this issue of the concentration camps, reminiscent of what happened during the Holocaust, where now we've seen, regardless of whether you are a practicing Muslim or not, as long as you are ethnically Uyghur, because we have even seen traditionally, we have Uyghurs in the political realm in East Turkestan who are puppets of the Chinese government. They themselves are currently being jailed, and they have nothing to do with Islam. But before the concentration camps, we would constantly talk about the banning of the bead, banning of hijab, people not being able to pray, banning of the burqa, banning of Quran. There are images of the Quran being burnt, and some people were brave enough to kind of bury their Qurans so that later on they could, if policies change, they could pick them up again. Because over these 70 years, there have been softening up in policies from time to time, and the Uyghurs take advantage of that, and then it becomes difficult again. So there is this kind of slaughtering of innocent people every 10 years or so. It reminds me of a film called Snowpiercer. I'm not sure if you've seen it. People are on a train, and every 10 or 20 years or so, they have, and the whole world's population is on a train. Every 10, 20 years, the train's population gets too large, and they have to, they make some fitna on it, and they kill the people. So this is exactly what happens in our land as well. So right now, that's pretty much sums up the last 70 years or so, what's been happening.
I was going to ask you about the history of the region, but Jazakallah khair for that. You mentioned that there's, what I suppose we could call a kind of ethnic cleansing or religious cleansing that goes on. And we read about this stuff in articles, and we hear about it. We might watch videos about it, but subhanAllah, so far away from the issue, it seems like it's just statistics, it's just news information. You did mention a little bit about having an experience or experiences like this in your own family, and so I imagine the issue is very close to you. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that from a personal point of view?
Yes. So my father-in-law is a very famous actor and comedian in East Turkestan. Everyone knows him. He's the equivalent to, say, in Australia, like someone like Carl Barron. I forget all the comedians now, but or Jim Carrey in the United States. And he was taken in 2018, November the 2nd, which was one day after the birth of my second daughter. So my wife gives birth, and the next day we're in Turkey at the time, and he disappears on the other side. He recently got released about 3 months ago, but he hasn't been able to contact us because contacting loved ones overseas in itself is a crime. But because he's a famous person, I'm not sure if you heard of the app TikTok. In Chinese social media, whenever there's a Western version of something, they have their own version, so that it's an intranet where only their own citizens can use. So Facebook for us, they've got their own Facebook. Instagram for us, they've got their own Instagram. So TikTok, they've got a program called Douyin. So we've been only able to see him on Douyin. Initially, when we saw him, he was he's like a big man, and when we saw him, he was very skinny, and clearly he went through some things. But because he is part of the elite, sort of, he's an actor and comedian, and he is high ranking in our community. They didn't really we're lucky to see him alive, because we have heard of many stories that people don't come out alive. And it's more than just a cultural genocide. We are beginning to see the signs for at least the last year now that this is slowly turning into a physical genocide as well, where people are coming out dead. They are sterilizing, and these are statements coming out from former detainees that have lived through the camps. They are sterilizing the men and the women, and going through that. They are living off 500-calorie diets. They are made to repent, make tawbah to the Communist Party, because they had made tawbah to Allah before. Can you see this oxymoron? You make repentance because you are making repentance to Allah. So, a lot of brainwashing happens. We have a program called WeChat, a Chinese program that you may see. And even on that, you are not allowed to mention things like saying Salamu Alaikum or may God be with you. You can't even mention these little phrases, and you have to kind of, you have to soften up,
There's bans on language as well. So, Alhamdulillah, we, like I said previously as well, we have young Muslims. Muslims generally are becoming more aware of the issues that our brothers and sisters face around the world, in the Muslim world specifically. But if you compare East Turkestan to, say, a place like Syria or Palestine, as important as it is, these places are holy lands in Islam, and it's so important to stay up to date on political developments in these countries and what's going on with the plight of the Muslims in these countries. But I think the fact is, and it's been acknowledged of late, that when it comes to a place like East Turkestan, it's very, very different. Muslims, mainstream, media doesn't report about it as much, and Muslims generally, therefore, don't really know much about it. Do you want to maybe, apart from what you've already told us, just so we can maybe try and visualize it a little bit? If you were a young person living in East Turkestan now, today, what are the kind of things that you might face? What are the kind of fears that you might face? How might a person like that feel or go about their daily life? What is it like when it comes to work, or what is it like when it comes to living standards? A young Muslim, a young practicing Muslim in East Turkestan today. Maybe give us a little bit about that.
Okay, so hypothetically, based on the articles and evidences and the things that have been coming out, if you were to be a young Muslim in East Turkestan, one, you'll be living in fear because you are arbitrarily detained. You don't know when you'll be detained. And before, it was a matter of, Fulan was caught praying, that's why he is in prison now. Fulan had a Quran on his phone, that's why he's in prison now. Now, there is no reason. That they just feel like taking you. So you don't know what's going to happen
just
tomorrow.
Enough that you're a Uyghur Muslim and they'll take you.
It's not even the word Muslim anymore. It's just you're Uyghur. So whenever your turn comes up, That's it. Like I said before it was, you know how you would say, why was he taken? Did he say something political? Did he do this? Did he do that? Now it's absolutely nothing. Because like I said before, even people that have worked for the Communist Party for 20, 30 years loyally, people on the verge of retirement or have already retired, they get a knock on the door and you're just taken. No trial, no nothing. So you can imagine Islam does not go through your mind at all. Unless you have some strong Muslims, they are doing dhikr in their heart, and that's it. That's all you can pray for. Because mosques are being destroyed. The mosques that you see on the television are in touristy areas. They are for people when foreign investigators or journalists do visit, and they are put on staged tours. Stage tours, I'm not sure if you've seen documentaries for North Korea. Journalists go in and they are put on these stage tours where they are shown the best parts of North Korea. That's what happens in East Turkestan right now. So they say, they'll say to people like yourself, like a journalist, they go, we would love for you to come. We will show you East Turkestan, or they'll say Xinjiang, and they will take you to all the places. And the reason why it's not as popular, sorry for using the word, as Palestine or Syria, because journalists, even when they do end up going to East Turkestan and they do want to make a story, their story ends up being about how they were followed the whole time for 4 or 5 black cars, and that they were followed by 20 spies. It always, their documentary or whatever news program that they were about to produce has to change because they have no opportunity to do so. And even when they do end up interviewing individuals, the individuals themselves are interviewed by the foreign journalists together with the CCP camera, the Communist Party camera, looking at them so they don't say anything wrong. No one dares to speak the truth in East Turkestan. Now, I have compared the Palestinian issue with the East Turkestani issue, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieve the situation of the Palestinians. But the Palestinians, as a Uyghur, we would say that if the oppression, and I hope your viewers don't misunderstand me, if the oppression happening in Palestine was happening to East Turkestan, we would say Alhamdulillah, because in Palestine, media can still go in and out. The media can still interview Palestinians and they will speak the truth. They will speak against the Zionist government. In Palestine, I have seen many clips where women in hijab are standing up to the Israeli soldiers. They can still fast. They can still pray. They can still give their children Muslim names. They still have Quran. Even if Aqsa is closed, they can still pray outside of Aqsa. They have imams not spreading the propaganda of the government. And when there are shuhada, when there are martyrs in Palestine, we know their names. We know which school they went to. We know how they died, how many bullets they took, if they were bombed, if they were shelled. We have all this information. But for us, if a family member of ours die, we find out months and months later. We don't get the body back. Have their organs been harvested? What has happened? We have no idea. This is the difference.
Oh, no. It sounds like it's some next level political suppression where, and in that situation, it's so hard to gauge public opinion. It's so hard to gauge even the reality of what's going on because they're taking advantage of the fact that I think a large part of the world is so ignorant of what's going on. And I guess in that, your work and the work of anyone trying to raise awareness about what's going on in East Turkestan is that much more important. But speaking about effort and speaking about responses to the issue, what kind of responses have we seen? Like, who's doing what, which government, and which, what kind of efforts are taking place in response? What's the response of the world been, particularly in the Muslim world? Has it been enough? Tell us a little bit about what you think about that.
So we have to understand that these concentration camps didn't happen overnight. This was well planned. China, as I mentioned, these concentration. Hello. Okay, we'll cut. Okay, so these concentration camps kind of started in 2014. Before that, a couple of years before that, so we're talking about 7-8 years before that, China was laying the groundwork in the Middle East, making investments, really getting close to Saudi Arabia and their allies, and really and with their One Belt, One Road project, really funneling into the Middle East, Turkey especially. Turkey has really changed up their messages, because before the One Belt, One Road project ever entered into the spectrum, Turkey would use the term East Turkestan and talk about, the government would talk about more about the Uyghur Muslims and all this. But especially after Turkey kind of cut relations with the United States, they've had to basically leech onto another superpower, which is China, and they've kind of changed. Now that no government official in Turkey uses the term East Turkestan anymore. They opt for the term
because they have a bit of a vested interest in that region.
Which is the equivalent of calling Palestine Israel. Okay, it's a very big issue, these names. So they laid the groundwork for that. Then they opened these camps, and pretty much what happened was, and we saw that the Middle East have generally been silent on the issue, to a point where MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, went himself to China, and he was supportive of the issue. And I had made a comment where the way that he dresses, if we assume that he is a practicing Muslim, he has a beard, he reads Quran, he does everything a Muslim does, he himself would have been a perfect candidate for these camps, and yet he was supporting them. So you would have heard about the letter that was signed, a coalition of countries, 22, 23 nations, and I believe Australia was also a part of that, where they had condemned the camps. And then a few days later, China got the support of 37 nations, and later on, I think 50 or 51 nations, most of them client states. Yeah, it's most of them, 80, 90% of them, Muslim states, quote unquote Muslim states, and the rest were South American states where they had vested interests with China. So it's a game where even when the United States does condemn China, and we've seen with Trump that they try and get the extra 5 to 10% in trade deals, and this goes for every European country as well. So for me, and this is totally my perspective, even when the Western countries do stand up for the Uyghur Muslims, it's not, yes, there are human rights charters and all these things, but it's more of making that extra 5 to 10% in trade deals, because if they were really genuine, the UN would have stepped in by now and said something, where they haven't, because the UN themselves are being funded by the Communist Party in many ways, and they are part of the top 5 that we constantly hear: Russia, China, the United States, France, and England. So yeah, this is the situation.
So it's been quiet on the eastern front, quiet on the western front, not much happening, not much of a response coming from the governments of the world. Look, on the issue of the harassment faced by Muslims from East Turkestan outside of Chinese occupation, what would you say about that? What do you know about that? And do you think that this has caused hardship? I imagine it's caused them a lot of hardship about the issue.
Yes, so this personally hasn't happened to me, but we have heard of, and there are reports and articles been written. You would have heard, and let's talk about the most recent issue, which is the Chinese government, or the Xinjiang government, again, one of our Uyghur puppets that work for the Chinese Communist Party, Shokret Zakir, the governor there, said that they have, after the, I'm not sure if you heard of the Uyghur bill that was passed in the United States. There is a bill that was passed, but it hasn't been made into law yet. After this bill was passed unanimously, there was one vote against, but 403 votes for. After this vote was passed, China quickly had to take some action, because any action that the United States takes, China only seems to take seriously when it's by the United States. So once that happened, China said they had released everyone. Once they said they released everyone, the Uyghurs abroad, there was a social media campaign called Still No Info, meaning we still can't get in contact with the loved ones that we haven't been able to contact for the past 2 or 3 years because of the camps. And so after that had happened, the Uyghurs were visited. The Uyghurs visited some of the families that were that the Uyghurs abroad claimed that their family were in concentration camps, and pretty much made videos that said that they were fine, that they were happy, and that were grateful. Absolutely all of them were grateful, and that they were not against the Chinese Communist Party at all. And still to this day, they can't contact their loved ones. Besides that, with their phone, they get calls, they get people have been followed, people notice cars outside their homes. And this is like something out of like a spy film, where people, if you think about it, you can't stick up for your loved ones outside, and when you do, you get followed and you get harassed. But that's just a scare tactic, because if anyone were to be harassed, it would have been me. So the idea is, the more you speak up, the more you are brave, the more you are courageous, the more they can't touch you. The ones that they are harassing are kind of on the sidelines. They're like, should I speak up? Shouldn't I speak up? And when they do, they get attacked straight away. Whether it be online, they get threatening calls, and it's been documented and detailed.
I don't know. I guess on that, it's such a beautiful thing you said, that the people who are harassed most are the ones that don't actually have the courage to actually speak out. And I guess from an Islamic point of view as well, that strength comes from Allah. Like, once you start to speak up, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you the strength to stay firm. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us all the strength and the steadfastness to actually rise up and address this issue and other issues facing Muslims. On that note, maybe from an Islamic point of view as well, would you like to say something, on the importance of speaking out? There's a lot of encouragement, there's a lot of commandments in Islam to speak up against evil, to do something, to respond to the cause of Muslims who are in need. Maybe a few words on that, if you will.
Yeah, so the people, unfortunately, the people in the Middle East, I don't expect to stand up, because they themselves, to a degree, are under some sort of oppression. I'm not going to get into the various countries' names, because I'm currently living in one. But the current country I'm living in Bahrain, they recently made a statement that they condemn the camps. So I'm happy on that part. But again, this is a people issue. Okay, so the more that the Muslims do stand up, and I think because the Muslims in the West are low in population, we really have to start to turn this into a human issue. There is, I forget the country he resides in now, but you may have seen a lone Jew protesting in front of the Chinese embassy for the Uyghur Muslims. This is not a Muslim issue anymore, because we're talking about 5 million people in camps, 5 million people dying. Obviously, there is from our deen, from Quran and Hadith, where we should raise, we should be raising the voice of the oppressed. If we cannot stop it with our hands, we stop it with our mouth. If we can't stop it with speech, we stop it in our hearts. And still, we are at a point, unfortunately, of trying to raise awareness. So the more the people pressure their governments, this is when the governments will do something, because the governments are not pressured at all. I mean, look at our own Australian government. We rely so much on Chinese investment and economy, and if we don't have them, we'll fall apart. Apparently, this is what the economists are saying. But if the people got together and said that we are not for your policies against China, and this was affecting the vote, this is when a change will happen. Because governments, especially in democratic nations, will not budge unless the people make them budge. And I guess I kind of went off on a tangent there. It was supposed to be more Islamic.
No, that's fine. That's fine. No, that's really important, I think, to think along those lines of, because, brother, at the end of the day, our primary motivation, especially when the going gets tough, when it's very difficult, our primary motivation becomes our deen. It becomes
Yeah.
like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has asked me to do something
Yeah.
about this. So no, Jazakallah khair for your words on that. I guess as a final point, thank you so much for your time, but as a final point, maybe a word of support. We have ourselves been trying to do something about it. You may have seen of the posters and some of the stuff that we've put up, the publicity that we're marketing that we're trying to do for this issue. We ourselves, I think sometimes some people have a skeptical view. You know, when you're so far from the issue, they sometimes get skeptical. You know, they say, what's the point? We're so far. Raising our voice here is not going to do anything. It's not going to change anything practically. We're not going to, you know, if we can offer material support, we'll do it. But other than that, what's the point? You know, so for instance, we've got a protest on the 2nd of February, next Sunday. We just want to gather the Muslim community and raise awareness. You know, that's really the gist of it. And there's nothing more to it. But there are some voices that are a little bit skeptical towards efforts like that, questioning the practicality and the usefulness of it. What would you say to voices like those?
I would say, you know how we Muslims say, "Oh, I wish I lived in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and I wish I was Sahaba." Well, this is it. This is our, and I hope some far right person doesn't take the video out of context. This is our jihad. This is the jihad that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us, people living in the West. Go to the streets, raise awareness, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you, and a lot of the Muslims in our communities in Australia come from war-torn countries. Those Muslims have to ask themselves, why were you, or how come Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took your family out in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, and you were born in the lucky country? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you a platform to speak on. They've made, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed an organization like yourself and others to give you a platform, and you are being invited. No one is asking you to shed your blood like the war-torn countries that you've come from. They're saying to give up an hour or 2 hours of your time and not just get rewards in the dunya, but in the akhirah. You are speaking for the mazlum. You are speaking for the oppressed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward you, especially you are doing this in a Western country. So I would think about the rewards of the akhirah. And I would go back to the Quran, where the ant was carrying that how much water, like an atom of a water, to try and put out the fire. What's that ant's bit of water going to do? But that's that ant's capability of putting out the fire. Do you know, if enough people, if a million people were to carry a bucket of water, that bucket of water would be, you know, will do a lot of damage essentially. And we've seen the damage that water does, you know, in natural disasters. So I would think about these things.
Of course. You know, we should all do our very little parts, and inshallah, the collective effort, inshallah, will bring about that change.
Exactly.
Khair, we'll leave it there, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for your time once again. And honestly, I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blesses your effort. You know, every second, every minute that you spend, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it like an hour or a day's worth of effort for the work that you're doing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make you a model for other Muslims. Jazakallah khair. You know, you're very, very busy, so thank you for the time that you've given us today. And inshallah, we'll be in touch. It was very nice to speak to you on a personal level as well. Jazakallah khair. We'll leave it there.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.